Howard Camish, who was our editor of the Windshield Post in the mid-50s and director of the region in 1958, and Peter Marcus, who was our club photographer. He's a professional photographer. His work appeared in magazines like Time and Newsweek and also in local papers. An excellent photographer, and his work graced the cover of the Windshield Post on many, many occasions. And so it's such a pleasure to see these two fellows who are both in their 90s now here tonight to visit with us and renew acquaintances with a few of us who are old enough to remember when they were very active in the club. As I had this fine meal here tonight, I remember back in the 50s we would have our annual banquet, and it would be at a place like Jack's on University, or War was, or Nice Polonaise, and you would get a notice in the mail from the club saying, choose whether you want chicken or steak. And the chicken was $2.25 and steak was $2.75. And although I don't like chicken, I think I usually ordered the chicken because that was 50 cents times 2 there was $1, and that made a difference in those days. The club was certainly not an affluent group, and at the time it was formed, it was a much younger group. I'd say about 50 or 60 years younger than the people sitting here today. And the cars they were driving, the classics, are cars that they admired when they were new and couldn't afford, but now they could afford them. And a lot of them were driven by members as everyday cars, and at the very least, some would be driving them as second cars. Well, you don't see very much of that anymore, but of course, the drivers and the cars are a lot older today. The group itself, like I say, being younger, didn't have very high paying jobs in those days, and it was a very egalitarian group. We did have bank presidents, and we had mechanics, and we had people who operated filling stations, and the true thing that kept the club together was the fact that we all were crazy about cars, and a person was admired for his knowledge of cars more than the fact that he might or might not have a bank account. I remember fellows like John Morgan, who I don't suppose ever had a very big paying job in his life, but was such a knowledgeable person about cars that everybody who knew John just thought the world of him. The club, the Upper Midwest region, was the first region to be chartered by the club. It was June 12th, 1953. The same day the Chicago region was chartered, so technically we're tied with them, but they've changed their name, I think, 3 times, from Chicago region to Northern Illinois region to Greater Illinois region. But today they're pretty close to defunct, and it's really marvelous to see the Upper Midwest region going very strong after 59 and a half years. I remember back in the 60s, which is the time that I was most active in the Upper Midwest region. Our region won the Turnquist Trophy for the best newsletter. The Windshield Post won the Turnquist Trophy 8 times in 10 years. That was certainly unprecedented at the time, and it was years before anyone approached a record like that. We also won the Bigelow Trophy 7 times in 11 years. Now that's the equivalent of the national championship. It was for the most active region, set up on a set of points that were devised by national. So we were a very proud group at those days, and it's marvelous to me today to see that the club is in the hands of second and third generation car people. The director here, Paul Lairs, is the son of Whitey Lairs, who some of us, most of us probably remember. Whitey was our club treasurer for year after year. He was absolutely a wizard at keeping the books and getting the bills paid. And apples don't roll very far from the tree, because now we've got Paul with us, and Paul's very much on top of his job as director. But he's certainly not the only second generation person here. And we have one of the other nice things is that we have people who have been members for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. John Paulson, who was just mentioned, had gotten his 50-year badge just a few months before he passed, and I know we're going to have a lot more getting their 50-year pins over the next decade. The club, one of the things that was a lot different in the old days was when you went on a classic caravan, you didn't trailer. Trailering was unknown. Nobody knew how to do that or had the equipment. And in 1970, they had the first Puget Sound caravan, and it was centered in Seattle. And 6 of us drove our cars from Minneapolis to Seattle for that caravan. John Boehmer, who was still an active member and was on the caravan again this year, was one. Bill Williams, one of our members who received the National Citation for Distinguished Service before he passed away about 3-4 years ago, was another. And John Paulson was another. That was 3 cars. My sons and wife and I were in a 4th car. Jim Fitzgerald drove his K Lincoln. That was 5 cars. I'm trying to remember who the 6th car was right now, but there were 6 of us. And that was quite an experience to drive all the way to the West Coast, do the caravan, and drive back. I remember another Grand Classic. Again, nowadays nobody even dreams of driving. Well, with one exception, we have a fellow here with a 41 Lincoln Continental who would drive to the Grand Classic in Alaska if they had one. But apart from him, hardly anyone drives to a Grand Classic anymore. And we drove 6 cars to Michigan for the 1959 Grand Classic. And there was a windshield post cover with the cars on the field and the drivers beside them, so it's all recorded in the windshield post. But imagine driving 700 miles to show your car in July, not the coolest time of the year, and driving back. One of the cars was Glenn Radke. Glenn Radke had a 4-stacker cord, very unusual. Most cords were 2-stackers, but on special order, the factory would actually put 4 stacks on each side of the exhaust stacks on each side of the car. And he won the first prize that the Upper Midwest region had ever won at a Grand Classic. I think he took a 3rd with the cord. Howard Camish drove his 1933 Pierce Arrow, and Howard is here, so he didn't suffer too much, because here he is all these years later doing very well. Nice to see him here. It's just amazing that some of the things that would happen driving to those events with cars that didn't have the care available that they do now. Nowadays, if something goes wrong with your car, it's pretty easy to get parts and get those cars repaired. But cooling was a problem in July. I remember driving our 42 Packard to Dearborn, and about halfway there, it was running too hot, and so we actually had carried a back flusher, and we actually back flushed the car on the Illinois Turnpike, at one of the oases. Another thing that happened on the same trip, we had a flat tire and we didn't have a proper, the jack wouldn't get the car up far enough to change the wheel. And one of the guys that was with us went out in the ditch and found a good-sized tree, a tree limb, or maybe a small tree anyway, that we used as a jack, and had just enough extra leverage to get the car up so that we could change that wheel. I mean, we don't think of doing things like that anymore, but we didn't think much of it at the time. We just went ahead and did it. Some of our members have become sort of famous or infamous in the Classic Car Club. People like Bill Williams, who received a citation for distinguished service a number of years ago, and who wrote a book called Motoring Mascots of the World. To this day, it's the definitive book on your hood ornaments. And I remember one day he told me, this was in the early 60s, he said to me, he says, I kind of like these hood ornaments, and so I think I'll start collecting them. And I said, oh, Bill, you don't want to do that. Some of these are selling for $5. I saw one go for $10 once. And you should have started collecting when they were cheap. But no, he assembled quite a collection of hood ornaments, and then wrote this book, which all of us can use today. And a Williams number, each one had a number, will identify it, take you to the picture of it in the book, tell you when it was made and who the artist was, and so forth. But I guess he's not the only one who didn't take my advice, and apparently didn't suffer for not having taken it. His widow still lives in New Hampshire, and their picture was printed in the Classic Car magazine about 3 or 4 issues back. A picture that was taken on the Pacific Coast Caravan with Bill and Dorothy and 3 of their 4 children. And so I called Dorothy up to see if she knew about it, and she didn't. And so we called the editor out in California, and he sent her a copy, and she was very happy to receive it. It was an excellent color picture of the whole family on that caravan. So Bill Williams certainly became was not only director of the region for a number of terms, but also became this worldwide authority on radiator mascots. Another one of our early members, Richard Gold, became national president of the Classic Car Club, the first member, I think the only member of the Upper Midwest region, whoever had that particular honor, and is today often credited for being the one behind allowing the Cadillac Series 62s to be classic. Now, some people still don't think that was a good idea, but and I didn't own one at the time, but I own a couple of them now, and they make excellent caravan cars. So the fact that he did that didn't turn out to be all bad. It did change the complexion of the Classic Caravan. The first caravan we had after the acceptance of the Series 62 Cadillacs, they had 29 1941 Cadillacs on the Classic Caravan. And so you lost a little of your diversity on a caravan, but it did get a lot of people behind the wheel. The thing I've noticed over the years is that the first caravan I went on was 1958, and Bob Turnquist was on it driving his 1930 Packard Roadster, and I was driving a 1941 Packard 180, and people driving modern cars like 41 Packards were sort of looked on like second-class citizens in those days. But we persevered, and by the what I call the 9/11 caravan, the caravan that was in Maine at the time of the 9/11 disaster. I was there in a 1930 Packard, and Bob Drink was there in a 1941 Packard 180. So I guess what goes around comes around. It's one of my biggest pleasures in the hobby is having my sons in the hobby with me. And about a month ago, right this weekend, 4 of them and myself were at the Louisville Concours d'Elegance at Churchill Downs, and all 5 of us judged at the Churchill Downs Concours. And it's a wonderful thing to be a father and to be able to have 4 of your sons with you at a show where you're given a responsible job of picking who gets the prizes at one of these big shows. But one thing I have learned over the years is that we all agree these cars are absolutely fantastic. But what I have learned is that although as fantastic as they are, the best thing in this hobby is the people that we meet in them. Just some people who change your life and people who are friends for life. And I'm glad to see so many of them here tonight. I will entertain questions if I didn't already talk too much. I'll listen to any questions about the old days that I can still remember. I have a good memory, but it's short. All right, well, with that, thank you for coming tonight. Pleasure to see you all again. We'll see you down the road. Coast to Coast Caravans coming up in May. We're hoping to do that, and hoping to have some Upper Midwest region members there too. We'll see you down the road. Bye-bye.